The Minister of Information and Communication Technology, Dr. Peya Mushelenga, is participating in the International Telecommunications Union's Global Symposium for Regulators, GSR, currently underway in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. The symposium is being held under the theme, Regulation for a Sustainable Digital Future. Dr. Peya Mushelenga now joins us all the way from Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to share more. Good evening, Minister, and welcome to the Daily Roundup.
Yes, good evening.
Just to start with, Dr.
Good evening, Nina. Good evening, Bess.
Thank you so much. Just to start with, Dr. Mushelenga, talk to us about, what are the key sustainability challenges that need to be addressed through digital regulation?
There are a number of digital transformation challenges that can be addressed through regulation. Internationally, the challenge relates to issues, for example, of energy efficiency. It is known that digital technologies they consume mainly energy and natural resources. And you also have issues related to e-waste, whereby you have the life cycle of some of the devices is very short, and each and every time you have these technical devices being disposed of. Now, what do we do with the disposal of this? It can be hampering to an environment. You have issues of ethical data protection, whereby you need to ensure that the people's privacy, security, and human rights is being protected.
Yes, Doctor. Going back to what you mentioned about energy efficiency and it being a challenge, how would one mitigate something like that?
Yeah, you can mitigate this challenge by, for example, looking at the digital strategies life cycles. That is that one can now be looking at using the devices that use more sustainable technology, and you look at the materials and the infrastructure that do not pose difficulties and problems to energy efficiency. So then you look at more efficient and sustainable technologies.
You partook in a panel discussion titled, How Can Policy and Regulatory Innovation Drive Universal and Meaningful Connectivity and Sustainable Digital Transformation? Could you just perhaps shed more light on that?
Yes, there we were looking to issues of accessibility as well as issues of sustainability and issues of ethical data issues, or security rather, issues of security. Now, issues of accessibility, we are looking at whereby all people would have access to devices. For example, if you look at the mobile devices, not only to have access to mobile devices, but also to have access to coverage. Now, with regard to devices, you would appreciate that some of these devices are not affordable to users. So the idea is to talk to suppliers to locate devices that are more affordable, looking at them as basic necessities. Because if you look, for example, at many learners, now they are asked to go and carry out homeworks and assignment that would require smartphones, for example. Then with regard to affordability, the issue of taxation comes in. Many countries are talking to finance ministers to look at tax reliefs with regard to devices and with regard to internet services, the providers of internet services to have some tax relief so that these services can be cheaper and affordable to many people. With regard to security, we look at issues of cyber security because there are a number of reports on cyber attacks. Then you also look at issues of data protection so that the information of people are being protected in order to safeguard their human rights.
Speaking of this digital divide that you're alluding to now, Dr. Mushelenga, and the issue of accessibility, and of course this is a very, very important discussion that probably should be had on its own as well. It's important, of course, to be able to reach people in these areas who really probably need information more than people living in the urban areas. But when it comes to strategies around this and solutions around this, what is the time frame we're looking at where we can see, these solutions becoming a reality?
First, I should say, before we look at the time frame, where are we now? Mm-hmm. We have 89% coverage. Now, this 89% is on average, but you have areas that are below 80% coverage. Now we are talking to operators because coverage is really done by operators. We are just a regulating institution. We are talking to operators to ensure that in areas where we have less than 80% coverage, at least we should have more than 80% so that there's no area that have less than 80% coverage. Now, the time frame differs from one operator to another because we have more than one operator in the country. We have about 4 operators. Now, it becomes an issue of competitiveness whereby the operator that is able to reach out to areas where other operators are is able to go there and set up their infrastructure.
Talk to us about how you see emerging technologies such as 5G and the Internet of Things impacting the telecommunications industry, within Namibia.
First, when 5G comes in, it will definitely stimulate economic growth. One, you are going to have more efficiency in terms of internet services. And you are also going to have a larger coverage of more people coming on board.
What role can international corporations play in regulating digital technologies for sustainability?
Well, as I say, you have now the International Telecom Union, which is an agency of the United Nations, which convenes meetings like this one of regulators. It sets the tone and the standards for regulators and for how we want digitalization to be rolled out. Now, it sets policies related to e-waste, policies related to energy efficiencies, policies and regulations related to ethical issues in terms of data protection and cyber security.
You mentioned
and as members of the ITU, we as a country, we are also learning from shared experience. That is part of the cooperation in this multilateral organization, is to learn from shared experiences on how to address digital transformation issues.
You touched earlier, Dr. Mushelenga, on having to look at where we are. And I want to ask, are there initiatives that have been put in place to ensure that, government addresses the issue of the digital divide that I mentioned and ensure that all citizens have access to basic, telecommunication services?
Yes, one, we have implored upon operators to adopt the shared infrastructure modalities. Because the reason why you do not have coverage in some areas is because operators will tell you we are unable to put up infrastructure there because of funds. But you find out that there will be infrastructure that are put up by other operators. For example, if you have a network that is put up by NBC, MTN or Powercom or Telecom, FTC should be able to use this infrastructure. And so vice versa. In such a way, we'll be able to accelerate the issue of coverage. And I would like to repeat that government is only a regulator. It is not government that put up this infrastructure. Government creates an enabling environment for this infrastructure.
Noted, Doctor. Also about learning, what can we learn from our neighbors within the region, and perhaps what can they learn from us?
There are much to learn, particularly issues related to cybersecurity and data protection, because we are in a process of finalizing our legislation, which we would like to table this year. So we stand to learn on shared experiences on how they have been fighting cyber attacks, on how they've been ensuring the protection of data, the protection of information of the users, so that they do not become susceptible to being exposed unnecessarily to unwanted parties.
As we round off our discussion this evening, Doctor, how do you see the telecommunications industry evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
I see in the next 5 to 10 years the telecommunication industry going to play a major role, because most of the institutions, their operations and activities will depend on telecommunications. We have seen it during the COVID-19 period that telecommunications or ICT in general has become a very important tool of trade for everyone.
Mushelenga, that's all the time we have this evening, but thank you so much for taking the time out there in Egypt to join us this evening. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
That was Dr. Peya Mushelenga speaking to us from Egypt this evening. Further on, let's take quickly a brief